In this DBT tutorial, I'll walk you through how to use DBT Core to run your data transformation workflow. This is going to be a crash course meant to be covering the basics for you to get started. For more advanced topics, I'll be covering them in separate videos. DBT stands for Data Build Tool. It's an open source data transformation and data warehousing tool created by DBT Lab, designed to handle the complexity of modern data pipelines. It provides a framework for defining, testing, and deploying SQL transformations and help automate the process of building, maintaining, and updating a data warehouse. DBT enables data analysts, data engineers, and data scientists to build, version, and maintain a library of reusable data transformations. So there are two different DBT products, DBT Core and DBT Cloud. DBT Core is the open source command line tool that can be used locally, which is what we'll be covering in this course. First, DBT Cloud is a web-based integrated development environment. Let me go over the prerequisites before diving into the tutorial. So first, you will need to have Python installed. My current Python version is 3.9. You will need some basic knowledge, knowing how to work with command line tools such as Bash or PowerShell. Since with DBT, we'll be doing most of the work in a terminal. You also need to have access to a supported database system, such as Snowflake, BigQuery, PostgreSQL, or Databricks. I'll be using Google's BigQuery as the data warehouse system throughout this tutorial. And finally, you'll need to have some experience working with version control systems such as GitLab or GitHub. I'll be using GitHub as the version control system throughout this tutorial. If you don't have an account, definitely sign up for an account if you don't already have one, and it's free. In terms of the agenda, I'll divide the course into 5 parts. In part 1, we're going to learn how to create a Python virtual environment dedicated to our DBT projects. In part 2, we'll create a GitHub repository to store the project files. In part 3, we'll learn how to connect to a database. In part 4 and part 5, we'll learn how to build DBT models, run tests, and generate documentations. Now let's dive into the tutorial. Alright, so before I start my DBT project, I want to create a Python virtual environment dedicated to my DBT projects. Launch your terminal. I'll be using Bash. To create a Python virtual environment, on my terminal, I'm going to run the command python -m vmv followed by the Python virtual environment name. And I'll name the Python virtual environment DBT Core Demo. And I'll create a folder that is going to be dedicated to this Python environment. Now in this environment, I can create multiple DBT projects, not just one. But first, I need to activate the environment first by changing the current directory to the Python virtual environment. And since I'm using Bash, I can activate the environment by using the command source, followed by the file path to this. If I go into the scripts folder, basically we need to run the activate file. Right, so on my terminal, I'm going to type source scripts activate. And once the environment is activated, you should see the project name on the top. And to install DBT command line tool, I need to run the command pip install DBT Core. And based on the database system that you're using, you also need to install the adapter. Right, so here let's look at the supported data platforms. Now in DBT, these are all the supported data platforms currently that is supported by DBT itself. Now if we look at this list, we have database systems such as Azure Synapse, BigQuery, Databricks, and since I've never used AlloDB and Gmail database system before, so I can't give too much information regarding those two systems. But some other popular database systems such as Postgres, Redshift, Snowflake, Spark, and Starburst. We also have the adapters created by the community such as IBM DB2, AWS Glue, and a couple others. Now going back to the terminal, and since I'll be using Google BigQuery as my database system, so I need to install the BigQuery adapter using the command dbt-BigQuery and enter. And here I have a typo. Let me install the libraries. So I'm going to run the command pip install dvt core and dvt BigQuery. And once we have installed dvt core, we can check the installation by using the command dvt-version. And that will change the dvt core version information and the plugins version. Now to create a dvt project, we'll run the command dvt init followed by the project name. For the project name, I'm going to name the project dvt_core_demo. Now in this step, it's going to ask me which database I would like to use. And currently I only have one adapter that is installed, which is BigQuery. I'm going to exit this screen because I want to show you how to install the connection manually. Alright, so I'm going to use the shortcut Ctrl+C, and I'll exit out the session. Now if I go back to my Python virtual environment, inside this Python virtual environment, I can create multiple dvt projects, not just one. Now let me navigate into my dvt project directory. When you go into your dvt project folder, these are going to be the files and the folders that you are going to see. Now on my terminal, I want to cd into my dvt project folder. So I'm going to type cd dvt core demo. Now I want to talk about the purpose of these folders and these two files. The README file is going to describe the purpose of this project and the overall scope. The dvt project YAML file is going to manage your project folders and the files and how the project is going to get operated. Now if I open the dvt project file, this name property is going to be the project name. And here you can specify the project version. The config version property is going to be the version number of the dvt structure, unless you're upgrading your dvt structure. Now let's learn how to connect to a database in dvt core. To set up a database connection, we need to create a profile file. Now from the C drive, I'm going to go into this users folder. Inside the users folder, I'm going to click into the folder with my username. And here you should see a folder name called .dvt. Now go into the folder and create a new file. Now you want to name the file profiles.yaml. Now open the profiles.yaml file. Here I'm going to insert my code snippet. Right, so this is going to be my default setup for my database connections. So this property here is going to be the project name. I'm going to go back to the dvt project YAML file, and here I'm going to copy the project name. And I will paste the project name. Now everything below this is a target property. So these are my profiles. So currently I have 4 profiles. Development profile, testing profile, production profile, and this profile is for something else. Alright, so I'm going to set my target profile to test. Now let me swap the position between development and test. I'll put a test profile on the top. Now if we look at the configuration properties, type is going to be the database type. Now if I move over the documentation for profiles.yaml file, and here's a template that you can look at to see what properties are supported. Now for BigQuery, the database type is going to be BigQuery. And to connect to my BigQuery database, I'm going to use a service account. And key file is going to be the file location of the service account file. Now let me go back to my browser. And I want to go into my BigQuery console. Let me put this window on the right. Now since I'm using Google BigQuery, let me put this on the left. So project is going to be the project name. And let me change my project to SQL for BigQuery. Now under my SQL for BigQuery project, I have multiple databases. Now let's say I want to connect to this testing database. Under the dataset property, I'm going to insert the database name. And for the threads, I'm going to set that to 1. And for the timeout seconds, I'm going to set that to 5 minutes. And location is going to be the dataset location that is host. And because I'm using BigQuery, so I can set the priority to either batch or interactive. And I'll set the priority type to interactive. Alright, so let me clean out the file real quick. Now save the file and close the file. Now if I want to make sure that I have set up the connection successfully, I can go back to my terminal and run the command dbt debug and enter. And if you provide all the information correctly, then you should see every single test is going to get passed. And here you can see that the status is OK, connection OK, meaning that the connection is set up successfully. Now let me close this dbt folder. I don't need this anymore. Alright, so I want to go back to the dbt project folder. Now let's learn how to perform a dbt run. dbt run is just a command line execution to build dbt models. A dbt model essentially is just a SQL file. And all the model files is going to get saved inside this models folder. Inside the models folder, we have this example folder, which contains some sample files. Now, these 2 SQL files are going to be your models. And let me open one of the SQL files so you can take a look at what the file looks like. Now, let's look at the first SQL file. Now, in this SQL file, we have this SQL statement. So here's the CTE, and we're selecting the output from the CTE table. Now, what makes dbt so powerful is that you can actually implement Jinja template or Jinja macros inside a SQL file. So, for example, here we have this config function in which we can control how the table is going to get created. And here the example is setting the materialization as a table. That means when we build this dbt model, this SQL statement is going to get built as a table. Now, if we look at the other file, in the other SQL file, we have this SQL statement. Now, noticing that from this from statement, we're actually using the Jinja macro to reference the table from the first file. Now, let's go back. If we look at this macro, so basically we're saying that we want to use the ref function to reference my first dbt model.sql file, which is this file right here. Now let me go into my BigQuery console, and I want to delete the sample tables. Right, so I'm going to delete all the tables in my testing data set. As you can see that my testing data set currently is empty. It does not contain any table. Now if I go back to my terminal and if I run the command dbt run, enter. Now dbt is going to erase all the files in the models directory. So currently I only have 2 model files. Now if I look at the terminal output, the first model gets created as a table, and the second model gets created as a view. Now if I go back to my BigQuery console, refresh the page, and here's my first dbt model table, and here's my second dbt model view. And that's how you build models in dbt. Now we have created the projects and the files. Now we need to store the files somewhere. Now in dbt, we can store the files in GitHub for version control. Now here I'm going to go into my GitHub account, and I'll create a new repository. I'll name the repository dbt core demo, and for the privacy setting, I'll set that to public. I'm going to leave everything else unchecked and click on create repository. Now to push the project files into this GitHub repository, I'm going to run the command git init, And here I'm going to change the branch to the main branch. Then I'll add all the project files. Oh, I forgot the git add everything. And if I run git status, these are all the files are going to get added to my repository. And here I'm going to run the git commit. And for the message, let's do add project files. Now we need to add the remote location to our project. So I'm going to grab the location path. And I'll type git remote add origin, followed by the GitHub repository address. Enter. Then I'll upload the project files using the command git push -u origin main. Now if I go back to my repository and refresh the page, I've uploaded all my project files into this DVT core demo repository. Now while I'm doing any development work, I don't want to touch any file in the main repository because those are going to be the production file. So what we need to do here is we need to create a separate branch using the git checkout -b, followed by the branch name. Now let's say I want to create a separate branch called development, and I'll provide the branch name development. Enter. Now my active branch is going to set to development branch. Now I've covered the basics. Let's learn how to build DBT models. As I mentioned before, DBT models are basically SQL statements, and the models are typically defined in SQL files in the models directory. For demonstration purpose, I'll be using tables from DBT Labs project, which is available publicly. Now in the models folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll name the file customers.sql. So here the file customers.sql. The file name customers is going to be the model name or the table name. Now I'm going to open the file and let me close the other two example files. And I'll leave the DBT projects file open. Alright, so let me go back to the customers.sql file. And here I'm going to insert my SQL statement. Now inside this customers.sql file, I have two CTEs. One is to create the customers records, and the other one is going to create the orders record. And the data source for the customer CTE is going to be coming from dbt tutorial.javashop.customers. And for the order CTE, the data source is coming from dbt tutorial.javashop.orders. Now going back to BigQuery, I want to add this dbt tutorial project to my list. So here let me remove this dbt tutorial project. Now to add the dbt tutorial project to your list, want to first of all click on this add data. Now here I want to click on start a project by name. Alright, so here I'm going to type dbt-tutorial and start. And I add the dbt tutorial project to my BigQuery project list. And I can expand this project, and that display all the data sets and tables that belongs to this dbt tutorial project. Now going back to the terminal, now if I run the command dbt run, enter, and dbt is going to rebuild all the models in my models file. So here I have two models in the examples folder. And this is a customers.sql model under the models directory. Alright, so here the model building is finished, but I notice that there are only two models are built. Now let me go back to my BigQuery console and just refresh the page. Actually, let me use my tool. Alright, so I noticed that only two models are built. I guess what happened was I forgot to save the file. So here let me save the file. And now we run the dbt run command. And this time I see three models are built. Now if I go back to my BigQuery console, refresh the page. And here's the customers model that is built as a view. As I mentioned before, the default materialization is set to view. If we want to change a model's materialization, there are two ways. For example, now I want to build this customers model as a table. The first method is using the dbt project file to specify how the model is going to get built. Now if I scroll down to the model section, the first layer is going to be the project name, which is going to be the root directory, dbt core demo in this case. Followed by in the models directory, how we want to materialize the models. So this example property is going to reference to this example folder. So any models that is created inside this example folder is going to get created as a view once I run the dbt run command. Now if I want to create a customers model as a table, here I can insert the materialize property. Then I can specify the model type, and I want to set that to table. Now I want to talk about this plus symbol. The plus sign means that I want to apply the materialization downstream based on the folder that I specified. In this case, it's going to be the example folder. Now let's assume that inside the example folder, I have several subdirectories. So it's going to be directory 1, directory 2. And in both folders, let's say I have some SQL files, so SQL models. And because in my dbt project file, under the example directory, I insert the plus symbol right next to this materialize property. When I build the models, it's going to apply the materialization for the SQL models inside these two folders. Now let's say I only want to apply the materialization to these two files, and I want to ignore these two folders. In that case, you'll just take out the plus symbol and run the dbt run command. Or if you want to set the materialization type to just one of the subdirectories, let's say directory 2. Going back to the project file, so here we'll type the folder name, followed by the materialization type. And I can set that as a table. Now here, let me save the file. And I'll run the dbt run command. And this time we can see that the customers model is built as a table. Now if I refresh my table in my tool, the customers model is now a customers table. So I can refresh the page. And I can click on the customers table and preview the records. Now the other method is to configure a model's materialization inside the SQL file. For example, let's go back to the customers.sql file. On the top, I'm going to insert two curly brackets. Then I'm going to insert the config function. And inside the function, I can set the materialization type using the materialize parameter. And I'll set this as a view and save the file. Now I want to show you something. Alright, so if I go ahead and run the dbt run command, now this time I'm going to get an error. And if we look at the error message, trying to create a view followed by the table name, but it can only exist as a table. We need to either drop the table manually, or we can run the dbt with -- full refresh command. Now every time when you run into an error, when you run the dbt run command, here, let me go back to the root folder. If you go into the target folder, then go into the run folder, then go into the project folder, models. Inside this models folder, under the target directory, I'm going to open this file here. The way how dbt is able to replace the existing table or the existing view based on different database platform is going to run this create or replace table statement and followed by the table name. And because I specified the materialization type inside the SQL file as a view, which has precedence over the dbt project file. So when dbt runs this create or replace table statement, it's going to automatically get an error because it cannot replace a view as a table. And again, I can manually drop this table or delete this table and run the dbt run command. Or I can, let me close this file. Or I can run the dbt run -- for refresh command. Now what the for refresh option is going to do is, let me reopen the customers.sql file this time. It is going to run the create or replace view statement instead of create or replace table. In BigQuery, the create or replace view statement is going to replace the table, whether if the table is a view or it's an actual table. Right, so if I refresh the list, the customers model is now built as a view this time. And that's the two methods how you can specify your dbt models using the dbt project file and use the config function inside a SQL model. Now let's learn how to build models on top of other models. As a best practice in SQL, you should separate logic that cleans out your data from logic that transforms your data. We can separate logics into separate models using the ref function to build models on top of other models. So for example, inside this customers model, I want to separate the customers and the oldest CTE into two individual models. Now going back to the models folder, and here me delete this example folder. Alright, so let me cd into the models folder. Okay, so that's weird. Let me make that as a string. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to create two files. One is going to be the staging customers.sql file, and the other one is going to be the staging oldest file. Alright, so let me open these two files. Now going back to the customers.sql file, I'm going to grab this SQL statement and I'll cut and paste onto the staging customers.sql file. Then I'll cut and paste the oldest SQL statement onto the staging oldest.sql file and save the files. Now I've converted the customers and the oldest city into their individual models. And to reference those two models inside this customers.sql model, so here inside the customers CTE, I can reference the staging model. So here let me insert the select from. And to reference the model, I'm going to insert two curly brackets, and it's going to be the Genja macro. Then I'm going to insert the ref function, followed by the model name, and it's going to be staging customers. Then I'm going to copy this SQL statement. Now copy and paste. And here I'll simply replace staging customers with staging oldest and save the file. Alright, so let me go ahead and let me check my testing data set. I'm going to delete all the tables inside my testing data set. Now all the tables are deleted in my testing data set. Now on my terminal, I want to build the models using the command dbt run. And here I'm getting an error. Alright, so let me take a look. Okay, so I know why. Because I created these two files in the target directory, that's why dbt won't able to locate those two models. So here let me move the files over, and I'll delete the example model. I'm going to close these two files. And just to make sure that the SQL statements are still in there. Alright, so everything looks good. Now let me try again. if I do dbt run to build the models, and this time I'm able to create the customers and the oldest models as tables. And for the customers model, because I specified the materialization as a view, so it's going to get created as a view when I do the dbt run command. Now if I refresh my BigQuery console, and on the testings, I can now see the 3 models that I built using dbt. Now we have a solid foundation building dbt models. We can move to the final lesson, testing and documentation. In dbt, tests are assertions you make about your models and other resources in your dbt project. We can add tests to a project to validate that your models are working correctly. And to add a test to a project, inside my models directory, I'm going to create a new file. I'll name the file schema.yaml. Now here, let me open the file. And I'm going to insert my code snippet. Now if we look at this schema.yaml file, so version is going to be the testing version. Then I'm going to insert the model section. Under the model section, I'm testing 3 tables. The customers table, staging customers table, and the staging oldest table. And because my customers model is creating as a view, so I need to rebuild that table. All right, so here let me refresh the list, and I'll delete the customers view. And I'll go back to the customers.sql file, and I'll set the materialization as a table. Now on my terminal, and because I don't want to recreate all the models, I just want to recreate the customers model. So for the dbt command, I'm going to type dbt run --select. Then I'll insert the model name customers, enter. And that will build just the customers model. Alright, so if I refresh my list, now everything in the testing data set is now tables. Now going back to the schema.yaml file, name is going to be the table name. Then we need to insert the column section, followed by the columns that want to test the assertion. So for example, for the customer's ID column, here I'm going to insert the tests section. Then I want to insert the assertion type. So these are the generic testing assertion type. In dbt, there are 2 different assertion types. One is unique, not null, accepted values, and relationships. And I'm going to save the file. And to run the test, on my terminal, I'm going to run dbt test, enter. And dbt is going to iterate all the YAML files in the models folder. And based on the assertion that we specified it, then it's going to validate each assertion and return the test status. And because in my models, all my assertions are valid, so it's going to return pass on every single test. And finally, to generate documentation, we can run the command dbt docs generate, enter. Now if we go into the target directory, and here's the HTML file that is going to be served as the documentation created by dbt. And to launch the documentation in a local browser, we can run the command dbt docs serve, enter. And that generates the documentation that looks like this. So here's our project structure. In the database information, on the bottom right hand corner, we have this graph that displays the relationship of your models. So this concludes this dbt core crash course, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you find this video useful, please give this video a like and click on the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.